Back at it again. It's another edition of the State of Football here, brought to you by the NFL Draft Bible, your new home for real football talk in the morning. Rick Saratella telling it like it is when it comes to the NFL Draft and everything football. It's the hot topics, the breaking news, which we got a bunch of today, and the stories that the mainstream media doesn't want to dive into. That's what we do here on the State of Football. So we've got a jam-packed show. I thought we were going to open it up with some Jaguars news because they dealt Yannick Ngakoue. But instead, we will open it up with the release of Leonard Fournette. But before you do, let me just tell you that we have a great show lined up with another all-star panel. Of course, my co-host each and every day down there in Nolens, Louisiana, John Murphy. We are joined by also today the Assistant Commissioner of the Northeast Conference, Ralph Ventry. Our vote for NCAA Commissioner. We need to appoint Ralph there. But some great NFL topics to dig into. Some also Big Ten news moving and shaking. We talked about the Nebraska lawsuit last week on Friday's show. We will actually have Craig Doman from one of the parents of the Nebraska players who were involved with the lawsuit on the Big Ten. Of course, Ohio State, those parents are also all riled up. They had their second march in 8 days yesterday. We'll talk a little bit about that. But, John, again, back over to the NFL where the Jaguars have been very proactive here. Some might say cutting the bad apples in the locker room. We saw the trade of Yannick Ngakoue to the Minnesota Vikings. We'll delve into that situation in just a moment. But the big news here, just a few minutes ago, it was reported Leonard Fournette, oh, by the way, somebody that you're familiar with in your neck of the woods. He has been released. He does not even make it through his rookie contract. We've seen a up and down career for the most part, I would say down, struggled with injuries, a very outspoken presence there. The Jacksonville Jaguars in the AFC Championship a couple years ago now are probably at the bottom of the league.
You know, it's an interesting scenario to say, like, after all this time, you know, in back-to-back days, you know, this is what you get. Especially for a guy that, you know, 2017, you know, over 1,000 yards, looks like, you know, it's headed in the right direction with things. The injuries started to pop up in 18 and really affected that season pretty much completely. You know, and then last year, there was a lot of that same behind-the-scenes talk that, you know, maybe their relationship there with the whole organization wasn't great. They sort of mended fences, you know, at least to get them through, and it's a productive season again. You know, so again, this is a very interesting scenario when you are the, you know, Jacksonville Jaguars, and we all know what the recent topic of conversation has been about the quarterbacks, you know, and they go through the up and downs with, you know, Blake Bortles, for better or for worse, in that scenario, and the decision-making when it came to that, you know, was quite suspect, you would have to admit. Now they go into the Minshew era, you know, after signing Nick Foles, and they move him, you know, a year into it, and now they're going with Minshew. What they're going to do in the backfield, you know, is it just Raquel Armstead, you know, and, you know, pray for rain if he's not the guy? You know, you're now looking at, you know, a lot of moves in just the sense of, to me, you know, it's not to poke at the Jaguars. It's to just look at the dynamic of what they've done and where is this all headed, right? You have a team that now, without a regular season the way that they were going to do it because of all the COVID stuff, now has to re-engage their home fans in Jacksonville to show up to the games that they were going to not be at home because their ownership was taking them overseas. Now they're going to try to play those games at home, you know, with or without fans. They might want to get used to the without fans scenario because their fan base is, you know, not exactly, you know, pleased with some of that decision-making. Quarterback, we've already spent some time on that. Now you've done this at running back. But like it or not, the guy has gone for over 1,000 yards 2 of the last 3 years. And now you received back in total for him nothing. and you tried trading for at least, the better part, of an offseason, a premier pass rusher, and you got 2 draft picks and more cap space. The issue being, who exactly is going to be the decision maker in what to do with all this cap space, next offseason? And where is the tug of war occurring in your organization where you've had to move around all the quarterback stuff? You have a tug of war with a semi-productive but not always content, feature running back, your primary pass rusher, and your cover corner, who was one of the best players in the league at his position, got traded for a draft pick that you turned into another cover corner. So we have a very similar looking unit defensively to what they had when they were going to the playoffs. You replace Fowler, you draft Josh Allen. You trade Ramsey, you draft CJ Henderson. So we're kind of going back and forth here where the new Jaguars are hoping to look like the old Jaguars defensively, but I don't know if are you getting the most bang for your buck here, with things? And is Jacksonville a destination place that having all this free agent capital will ever really turn out to be, something that you can really put to use? Or will it keep being the thing where you're seeing contracts that are extensively overpaying for guys to get them to go to Jacksonville? And if that's the case, I'm not sure that this is a, progressive movement where I'm pretty sure that Fournette's money is just dead cap space for this year. So what's the downside, or what's going to be the explanation? Why now, right? Like you don't see anything that's happened now to explain why cut him now when you already didn't pick up the 5th-year option. Okay, that's okay. He could have played out this year and helped you. He's better than what you have as an alternative, and now you're carrying the dead cap space, and he ends up on a team maybe like the Bears where he actually plays well for them, and you're carrying dead cap space, and potentially you have money to spend next year when everybody else doesn't. But I'm really not sure if this is, is anybody here seeing the Jaguars as a contender in the next 2 or 3 years without a couple of really interesting things having to happen, even though they're armed with cap space and draft picks? The problem is, I'm not sure in that whole front office coaching set, like who's really in charge. If it is Tom, that's probably the best scenario for them. But it seems like they have too many people there, and I'm not really sure. Is it the GM's team? Is it Coughlin's team? We know it's, the Khan's team at the end of the day, but who are they going to decide is the decision maker in all of this? Because it seems like it keeps kind of flowing back and forth, and that's why it seems like there's such kind of, like there's no order really to what they're doing, because they keep making moves and then they come back and add the same type guys back, just a different name and a different package.
Well, Coughlin is out of there. So to me, this falls on David Caldwell, Ralph. And to me, in my opinion, he waited too long to deal off Ngakoue. You only get a 2nd-round pick in return. John mentions the dead cap money. I see Dakota Follett, our super producer in the chat room, $46 million in dead cap money now, $30 million in cap space coming into the season, an estimated $60 million of cap space available going into next season. And we had Neil Stratton on last week with his new book, Scout Speak. One of the interesting tidbits was former NFL GM Phil Emery, who is still a scout with the Atlanta Falcons organization. He said, you know what? Maybe we didn't succeed, but he said, I have no regrets, because each and every year we spent every dollar and we gave our team the best chance to win. And I'm not seeing a vision here for winning there in Jacksonville.
Yeah, and John mentioned that he didn't want to necessarily take a shot or poke fun at the Jaguars, but I have no problem doing that, because really I'm kind of puzzled as a football fan as to what's going on in Jacksonville. They're getting rid of all the higher paid personalities. Ngakoue and Fournette are two guys who wouldn't be afraid to speak up and make their feelings felt to the media. And when you see teams do this, try to create cap space, get rid of some larger-than-life characters out of the locker room, it's like when they're starting to rebuild and start from scratch, really, with a new regime. But the Jaguars are still holding on to Doug Marrone. So really, what are they doing over there? And you mentioned Ngakoue. Ngakoue goes for a second rounder and a conditional fifth. Meanwhile, the Jets get 2 first rounders for a safety in Jamal Adams. So either the Jets got a great deal or the Jaguars were fleeced, because I don't care as much as you may like Jamal Adams, he's still a safety. And I didn't understand. A safety is very important, but I didn't know that became a premium position in the NFL overnight. As far as when you're talking about the guys who are getting high paid on a defense, it's usually your cover corner and the guys who rush the passer up front. So, I don't know how much you want to spend on a safety, so to speak, and that brings into question to me that Budda Baker deal. But anyway, the Jets got 2 first rounders for a safety, and the Jaguars settled for that for Ngakoue, who's supposed to be one of the elite defensive linemen in the game. And then just going back to Fournette for a minute, I never personally was a fan of Leonard Fournette. I always thought he was overrated, and he definitely turned me off when he was coming out of college and talking about how, he had 2 NFL practices under his belt, and he's talking about how it's no different than LSU, and, he could hit up here with the – he was just a little too overconfident for my liking. And then I do have to admit, I haven't watched much of the Jaguars in recent years. I don't know why anyone would. But I did see them 2 games in particular that stand out in my mind. One was a wild card game against Buffalo, the 2017 season, and Fournette was a non-factor, completely bottled up. Blake Bortles actually outrushed him in that game. That was a game that I was lucky enough to be at, but it wound up setting offense back about 15 years in the NFL. Nothing like a 10-3 playoff game. But then the other one was a year later when Buffalo played Jacksonville, and it was Josh Allen's rookie year, and Jalen Ramsey had been shooting off about Josh Allen, and he made one of the greatest passes I've seen an NFL quarterback make when Ngakoue was coming down on him to Robert Foster. But anyway, Fournette in that game didn't do anything as well. As a matter of fact, he got ejected for throwing a punch at Shaq Lawson on the sideline, coming off of the sideline to throw a punch when he wasn't even in the game. So whatever. It feels like I'm spending 5 minutes killing Leonard Fournette, but I was never that big of a fan, and he never seemed to wow me at the NFL level. So, but then again, do I really matter? Because I'm not an NFL GM, so I guess he really doesn't need to wow me.
Well, you go back to college, too, with the injury that held him out, and then all of a sudden he's in a shoving match at the 50-yard line and says, hey, buckle up, I'm going to play this game. How injured were you really, Leonard? But, David Caldwell now, I'm not sure if he gets an extended lease on life, setting himself up with 7 picks within the next 4 rounds next year, or, to John's point, if somebody else will be calling the shots. I think it's interesting. They did part ways with Coughlin, but they kept Coughlin's coach, like Ralph mentioned. Doug Marrone is still there. So does Caldwell fire Marrone after the year and say, hey, look, we're going to start it all over again? But enough on the Jaguars. John, I'll let you finish up if you care to comment. But to me, I see an NFC that's completely wide open. We've talked about the Saints and the 49ers. I like the Cardinals as a surprise team. But suddenly, you mentioned the production, Ralph. 37.5 sacks, 14 tackles for loss, a bunch of forced fumbles there 4 years in Jacksonville. He's now opposite of Danielle Hunter, John. The Vikings now with top-tier talent at every level of that defense. You talk about Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr at the linebacker, Harrison Smith holding down the secondary. Kirk Cousins might not be everybody's cup of tea, but it gives you a shot. Let's be honest. I think the Vikings are not only the favorites now in that NFC North, I think they're a legitimate Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, I think the two things you have to see there is I'll go with the first one. I think they've now put themselves it'll be interesting in the next couple of days to see, was this trade, it makes sense. The Jets and the Browns, I guess, were two teams, heavily involved, at least in the communication or conversation. With him, he would have been able to, potentially see himself, with a long-term deal. And Minnesota's another team now that you could see him with a long-term deal, because how will Hunter respond to this when now they have another guy there and Hunter already wanted his money readjusted, with things? So was this sort of the Vikings being proactive to say, like, hey, with all the COVID and everything going on, Hunter could opt out on us, or sit the way that Melvin Ingram did until they guaranteed his money. So getting Ngakoue and knowing that he might be a guy that would stick around and sign a long-term deal there, how do things play out with Danielle Hunter, in the coming days? And I still think until and he's just going to have to live with this, is going to be his career until it's not, just like Steve Young pulled the monkey off his back. The final 10 seconds are going to be counting down, to win the Super Bowl. And then Kirk Cousins will be the worst quarterback ever to win a Super Bowl and take that away from Trent Dilfer. So, it's not going to be just Kirk Cousins, right? We've seen they need Dalvin Cook, right? They need that to play well. The offensive line, I still think that's the area, if you wanted to concentrate and take a look, you'd have to say O-line as a group, and then the outside cover guys. They've had safeties. Their outside cover guys have to continue to take a step forward in the big games, in the big moments. I would still fear that Aaron Rodgers, 2 minutes to go in the game, as Aaron Rodgers, even with an improved pass rush, can that secondary hold up? And who will be the other guy than Thielen? Because we kind of saw the give and take with that offense at times, much like the Cowboys, where there's a lot of stats and a lot of points at times. But then there's other times where down and distance is not really, been their favorite thing to pay attention to. And they've had some long stretches in games, important games, that they've not been able to stay on the field. And their run-pass combination has not turned out, for the guys that they've had. So I think this is a really good move, especially in the type of season that we're dealing with. I think it probably puts Danielle Hunter kind of on the spot. If he's going to try to say, pay me or else. All right, well, they got another guy, now there. So it would probably be in his best interest to just play it out. And move forward. But I still think that until Cousins really, and it's unfortunate and it's probably not fair, but until the stats and the wins culminate with an entire season full of that, there's still a team that in a big pressure moment, I still got to see what I got to see out of them. And, I'll give you the first one, the Super Bowl one, not yet.
Well, Kirk Cousins will be ready to say, you like that? Let me just make some follow-up points here when I'm listening. In terms of the Adam Thielen counterpart, Olabisi Johnson was the smoothest route runner out at the NFL PA Bowl a couple of years ago. I really felt like he came on, and he's a guy, at least for fantasy football players out there, which we don't really delve into too much, but today we are. Olabisi Johnson, I think, is a guy, a late-round flyer that you should be looking at, as is now James Robinson. from Illinois State, the undrafted free agent. Everybody's running to the waiver wire, picking up Raquel Armstead, who I love, by the way, and I followed his career extensively at Temple, but he is known to be banged up. James Robinson, I think, was hurt by the FCS bias. Only 6 FCS players drafted this past year. James Robinson, I thought, should have been one of them. Suddenly, I would not be surprised if this guy catapults up to the top of the depth chart. And I will say this, I don't think it's been mentioned. The fact that Ngakoue took $6 million discount to go to the Vikings, and the fact that the Vikings still failed to get a first-round pick in exchange. You're talking about 60 cents on the dollar discount, and you still fail to get a first-round pick. Well, David Caldwell, you're on my hot seat.
Yeah. Well, and to double down on that, you take on paper, from 17.3 and potentially $19 million down to 12.6. Well, that's $17 million in Florida. You're now getting 12.6 with 9.5 or 9.6% sales, tax in Minnesota. So not only did you take a front end pay cut, you took a back end pay cut too, just to, push that issue. So like I said, it's a problem, I think, as an organization. And there's several of them. They're not the only one. To say Jalen Ramsey, Leonard Fournette, Ngakoue, the up and down dealings with the quarterback, and those are all very different people and different scenarios. Blake Bortles never had any friction, it seemed like. If his friction was there with the organization, it was more the lack of belief or, him wanting them to double down and invest in him and just trust the process would show up, on the back end with him. So, as an organization, that's a tough pill to swallow, when you talk about, where they drafted Bortles, Fournette, Jalen Ramsey, and also Ngakoue. And then we're not even mentioning the Dexter Fowlers and others, that have come and gone, out of there in recent years. That's a lot of talent lost, and what's in return is still to be determined. But you're building a very similar, team to the one that you had when it was not a quarterback-driven team. It was driven by having so many really good football players across the roster. And that's why I said it'll be a very interesting scenario, because now that they've built the cap space and the draft picks, who do the Jacksonville Jaguars trust to now do all of that rebuilding that's ahead of them?
Ralph, final word on the Jaguars.
No, I just think that it's sad to be a Jaguars fan, obviously. And there's one common theme between those three players that you mentioned, Jalen Ramsey, Leonard Fournette, and Ngakoue. And to me, all three of them were outspoken. All three of them, the way they act, it could be perceived by some to be selfish. But with that said, the Jaguars clearly haven't been committed to winning. They don't spend. They should just move to London already. That's all I got to say about the Jaguars. Let's talk about more important things.
Let's move on. The dysfunction in Jacksonville continues. The hot topics here on the State of Football continues with Rick Saratella, John Murphy, and Ralph Ventry. We thank you so much for tuning in. We're here each and every weekday, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern, and we shift gears to the college football landscape, Ralph. And before we do, the big news to me that came out yesterday, some statistics that the mainstream media does not put out there to you, but what we're beginning to learn as we understand the COVID a little bit more. The latest statistics from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, also known as the CDC, is now reporting that 6% of the 183,900 deaths are listed as COVID only. So, in other words, 94% of these deaths had underlying conditions. We're also finding out that 92% of the deaths occur in people 55 years or older. Now, this is impacting small businesses. This is impacting currently 500 million children who are cut off from school. This is impacting, I can speak to the gentleman on this panel, job cuts and furloughs. This is impacting the entire world, but this is the state of football, Ralph. And we're going to focus on the Ohio State parents who staged another march yesterday, I believe, at the Ohio Stadium Rotunda with 200 fans in attendance as well. They are seeking answers. They're pushing for a fall season. They're saying, hey, by the way, the Big Ten has started exploring winter options in domes, a Thanksgiving start. But the parents are saying, no. We want a fall season. We want the right to play in the college football championship. Give us 3 weeks for preparation. And by the way, we'll save the school that $130 million that they're set to lose by postponing or canceling the season. It can all happen. Yet, Kevin Warren, we don't have answers. And Ralph, at the end of the day, do you believe he was too early to pull the trigger on the cancellation / postponement of that Big Ten season?
Well, to be honest, I'm more of an expert at the FCS level, and Division I is really split into two here. The FCS and FBS are living in two different realities. As you may know, the NCAA, when it comes to football, the NCAA sponsors one Division I football championship, and that is the long-running traditional FCS playoffs. It's now up to 24 teams, and the NCAA has canceled that championship event for the fall, and it has canceled its other fall sports championship events as well. And there is discussion at the national level to possibly play these championships in some form in the spring. When it comes to FBS football here, you have to remember that the college football playoff is an entirely separate financial entity. It's its own organization. It does not answer to the NCAA. It makes its own television contracts directly with the networks. The Power 5 conferences at the FBS level all have TV contracts that are negotiated on a conference basis directly with the networks. So basically, the NCAA is not seeing any money from FBS football, and they're really quite not in charge of it. Now, they set general codes of conduct for athletic departments to operate, and of course, in the COVID era, they have published guidelines that all competing student athletes should follow. But in terms of FBS schedules and bowl matchups and television money, the NCAA is not involved in that. That's Big Ten has its own deal. SEC has its own deal. The bowls all themselves are separate financial entities. The Rose Bowl is still its own organization. It has its own board of governors. So basically, FCS and FBS are in two different situations right now, and if it is deemed safe to compete, I can understand and I can see the FBS having some kind of competition this fall. One other thing, you saw an FCS game, the FCS kickoff on August 29th. You saw that as the first college football game of the season, and there are, I think, 14 FCS schools who are competing. Nobody's playing really a full schedule. It's a lot of patchwork here and there. North Dakota State is playing a standalone game at some point in October. But just to let you folks know what has made that possible is the NCAA has granted a blanket waiver for eligibility. So competition this fall on the football field will not count against any student athlete's eligibility. So this blanket waiver kind of makes one of those pop-up games possible if schools can find a safe environment to compete and they have interest in competing in some form or fashion. In the fall, in this case, ESPN televised the game, so that's certainly some incentive for your institution to get tremendous amount of publicity. So you may see some of that throughout the country.
You make a lot of great points. This is excellent insight by Ralph Ventry, our guest here today. I'm curious to know, Ralph, you mentioned the FBS playoffs and that they're a separate entity from the NCAA. Obviously, there's a lot of money to be made, a lot of revenue. How does that get divvied up? Do the participants of the playoffs see any of that money, or how is that revenue distributed to the other teams, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe the playoff participants and their sponsoring conferences as well benefit from all of that television money that the CFP gets from the networks. So it's a conference. It gets paid out to the conference, and then I'm sure different conferences have different structures in which they share revenue that comes in. Some conferences may give a guaranteed set distribution to every school in the league on an annual basis. Some will distribute the money to everyone, but give a bigger portion of the money to the school who won it, who the participating school. I know, of course, the bowl game structure. A lot of that has to do. You would see the bowl payouts made directly to the conferences and the schools. So I think, for example, at one point, the Holiday Bowl, the participants may be guaranteed, $5 million each. But that money is not funneled through the NCAA and the national office at all. That's directly to league offices and to the participating schools.
Interesting.
So the college football playoff, they have their own TV deal to deliver X number of games on these dates. And yeah, they are their own entity. They have their own, obviously they have their own selection committee, that they have some folks who are involved with NCAA athletics, but you also see some at-large members on there. Condoleezza Rice was a member at one point of the CFP selection committee. Recently, Chris Howard just left. He's an Air Force Academy, a former athlete at the Air Force Academy, and he is the president of Robert Morris University. So they do their own thing. They march to their own beat. Those teams are following NCAA protocols and rules as far as eligibility and such. But as far as the product and the television deals, they're doing their own thing.
Good stuff, John. Ohio State projected to lose $130 million by canceling or postponing the football season. Of course, the second March in 8 days, you saw Sean Wade's father with the T-shirt, "The Easy Way Out." And Justin Van Fulpen was on last week making the point that Kevin Warren's son, who plays for Mississippi State, will participate in the college football season, which riles up the parents even more. And we're waiting to have one of those parents on here soon. But your take here on the Ohio State situation.
Yeah, I think, again, it boils down to, they made their decision, even though they are saying as university, like, hey, there was a time that we were pushing back as well. Clearly, Ohio State, as an organization, did not want that decision made as quickly as the rest of the conference wanted to make it. They clearly, like I said, they were not willing to go forward and worry about the long-term effects of somebody coming back and saying, whether it was because they failed a test at the combine for the draft, or somebody got sick in their mid to late 20s, down the road, they were not willing to face the consequences of the secondary aspects of this and play. They didn't want to take that insurance risk. That's clearly what this has boiled down to. And so everything that's happening now, it's just going to be the offset of what they're hearing, the pushback that's coming from all these different places. And I think now that's why you're hearing the potential of, well, hey, maybe we could get things settled and some medical things have changed. Maybe the testing is a little more affordable. Maybe can we get everybody quieted down by possibly a November, type start, or like, hey, for sure, we're pushing to try to, look and see if January and using, the indoor facilities that are available to us to play, but you're still changing the optics, of things, and you still have a real brand, group of people who are looking for answers. And I think their answers are not only why did you make that decision, but how did you come to that conclusion, and why were the parents and other people involved in the Big Ten? Why was there no real discussion? Why were the parents and others not really included in all of that? So I think a part of it is they're going to see other people playing football. They see it in a path or a way to be done right here, right now, without changing all their student athletes, issues that will come up by playing later in the, the fall or early next spring, because it now takes you out of some of the NFL draft optics. But I also think some of the other thing with the parents is, what isn't safe? What did you go, come to that conclusion with? Because I think a lot of people want some facts to support the decision. They're not just willing to take the decision at face value. And that'll be something very interesting here to ask Craig, in terms of for himself as a parent, but also somebody who knows enough about the business to know why some of these parents, with their student athletes that are seen as potential have pro aspirations, why shutting it down right now and just pushing it off to the spring is not cut and dry for every kid.
Well, let's talk to one of those parents right now. We actually have Craig Doman from 360 Sports. We know him in the football universe with his agency, but he's also the father of JoJo Doman, who plays for the University of Nebraska and goes back quite a ways with head coach Scott Frost there. Craig, welcome into the show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the State of Football. And there's a lot to dive into, but we saw we're doing great. And we saw, the lawsuit filed by the 8 Nebraska players, which you are involved with. Shortly thereafter, we saw the Big Ten suddenly now discussing and weighing other options. Please take us through this process, where you guys are at, and what you hope to ultimately achieve.
I think what we want to accomplish is very simple. We want transparency. Kevin Warren in the Big Ten Conference is welcome to do whatever they want, but they have to follow their bylaws, number one. And number two, they need to tell everybody why they did what they did. There wasn't any transparency in this process. And if anybody would look up Kevin Warren's comments to the media, to any public comments, he's been radio silence for a couple weeks. And he's come out and said, hey, we might revisit. But there's never, ever been a disclosure of how the process unfolded. There's in their bylaws, they're supposed to have a vote. By all accounts, they didn't have a vote. He basically called up his homeboy at such and such school. Hey, what do you think? I'm thinking these other people don't want to play. You don't want to play, do you? And all of a sudden, we're not playing. And so I think that the parents went with it for a couple days, and the players were, you can't expect an 18 to 22-year-old man to take litigation. That's not something he's thinking about. He wants to play football. So the parents, Kevin Warren has done something that no one ever dreamed would happen. All the Big Ten parents get along. We've been on Zoom calls with parents from Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, all these schools. We are all on the same page. So the irony of this whole thing is that, Kevin Warren is going to lose his job, and he probably should lose his job. He's shown unbelievable poor leadership in this situation. I don't know if he can recover professionally. And that's not what this is about, but he is in a tough spot. I'd hate to be in his situation right now, because how he's handled this There's no light at the end of the tunnel for him. And then the second thing is, this is pretty brass for me to say, but the Big Ten landscape may change in the future. If there's ever an opportunity for realignment in the college football world, I don't think too many schools are going to go, oh, we got to stick with the Big Ten now. The Big Ten is the golden child. I think, if I was Ohio State, I'd already be talking about how can I get out. I'd be looking for opportunities to move. Why not? You don't need the Big Ten. Big Ten needs you more than you need them. So when it gets back to the lawsuit, though, it's really about transparency, understanding what the process was, and there was potentially some tortious interference in the process. But from a legal standing, this is really not about the law. Sometimes the purpose of a lawsuit is not to get money. Nobody wants any money. All we want is we want to understand what happened. We want to hold them accountable for their own bylaws. And we potentially want them to right a wrong. And as the COVID landscape continues to change, it's getting more positive. More and more organizations are coming out and saying, hey, even the death rates are wrong. Not that many people really died from COVID. I'm not an expert in COVID. I don't want to be an expert in COVID. But as the NFL starts to play on September 10th, as high school football is happening in Ohio right now, and a lot of states, why can't Ohio State play? My son plays at Nebraska. He's a starter at Nebraska. But really, I feel the worst for Ohio State. They got a serious Heisman Trophy candidate. They are ranked number 2. They have a legitimate chance to win the national championship. And you're taking that away from them? They're the ones that are being harmed as much as anybody.
Well, Craig, definitely appreciate hearing it from somebody who's now seen literally all aspects of this business. When you take it just to the one player that you're most interested in, how is it affecting a young player like your son, who, number one, is now a senior, has already graduated? So, I mean, he's doing all the right things at Nebraska, besides being a very productive football player, tremendously involved in all the organizations and things off the field, known to be a high character guy in their program. Is it because of all of that and your knowledge of college football and professional football to why a guy like that, who clearly could have had other options, has decided to just stay and not look at entering the transfer portal? Because that there would clearly be teams that are playing, and you've seen Texas Tech. I mean, forget about the Red Raiders. They have become the Land Raiders, in terms of transfers. They're on their 8th or 9th, Power 5, type conference transfer, heading to Texas Tech. Take me through, has that ever been a discussion that your son has brought to you, or as a father? But when you remove the father figure hat and you put on the football Craig Doman hat, well, hey, like JoJo Doman is a really good looking football player. If you're looking for a senior linebacker and somebody that could come in and add some leadership, there are definitely programs that were interested in him coming out that are going to be playing in the coming weeks.
No doubt about it, John. And here's how I break it out. From a father perspective, I've got to support my son. And he came home last week, and I just kind of had a father-son conversation with him about, hey, dude, what are you thinking? And he's like, Dad, I want to win at Nebraska. Okay. I want my legacy to be that I was on a winning team, that I started on a winning team. And so his brain is about finishing the job at Nebraska first, not worrying about the NFL. And so I have to be in alignment with him. On a business side, he probably should get out. He probably should go to an SEC school and go, hey, if you can't play at LSU, you can't play in the NFL. If you can't play at a top program, don't expect to have an opportunity to play in the NFL. So be a grad transfer, jump out. It's no different than what the guys had to do this year. You got to learn quick. You got to learn a new defense, learn a new scheme, see what you can do. And hey, go out with the fight. But I think that from a father perspective, getting back to what his goals are, His goals are to dominate. If you look at the way the NFL experience works, you really have probably 3 different experiences. You have the guys that are drafted like in the top 100, top 50. Those guys get second, third chances. And you start seeing it in the media narrative, oh, he's having a tough time picking up the steam. Oh, he's struggling with the hammy. Have you ever seen an undrafted free agent struggle with the hammy? It's always the first rounders. It's never the undrafted guys. So that's a different narrative there. And 50% of those guys are going to bust. And a lot of them are going to go to the Pro Bowl. You just don't know who's who yet. Well, my son's not going to be that guy. Okay. Then you got the guys in the middle. And those guys are production guys in college, and they've got to earn it. They're subject to get cut, but they could end up being ballers. And then you got the guys, the tail end of the draft, that they got to be at every practice. They got to be on their A game. Hey, if they need somebody to be a long snapper and they've never long snapped before, they've got to run out on the field and say, Coach, I'll do it. It's that kind of guy. And a lot of times those guys will stick in the NFL for 2 months. And the cuts are coming up this next weekend. Those guys' careers and dreams are gone. They played a couple months and that's it. Well, a lot of players, including my son, are in that second or third category. So if you had a chance to come back and play and dominate, and that's your legacy, that's not a bad option. He's not sending home stipend checks so we can pay our rent. So he's okay. The ones I feel bad for are the players that are in that third category that do have to send stipend money home to their mother so she can pay rent. So they need him to jump to the league as soon as he can. But he might only be there 2 months and may never play in an NFL game. And the last thing I'll say is if you begin with the end in mind, one of Stephen Covey's 7 principles, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think it's around 3.3 games is the number of real NFL games a player plays in. So you guys know you got these guys on a practice squad for 2 and 3 years, never playing a game. That's not an NFL career. So if you really want to have an NFL career, anything you can do to get drafted higher, the teams have more invested in you, so you have an opportunity to show you have a better opportunity to show what you can do. You should do. So going back to my son, if he dominates in Nebraska, even if he comes back for a 10th year or whatever it may be, he might be 30 when he gets out, he's going to be better off than jumping.
Very interesting perspective here with Craig Doman, of course, 360 Sports, the father of JoJo there at the Nebraska squad. Ralph, listening to Craig speak, you bringing the commissioner experience there at the Northeast Conference, anything here specifically that you want to address to Craig?
No, well, I'm a happy parent right now because my 7-year-old is playing flag football here in Monmouth County, New Jersey. He's practicing every Tuesday and Thursday, and their first game will actually be Sunday, September 13th. So he's been practicing for about a month now. We have full contact sports are allowed to be played in New Jersey outdoors. So I'm a happy parent of a 7-year-old flag football player. As for the college side, I absolutely understand all of the student athletes' frustration. They're football players. They want to play football. It's been a big part of their lives growing up. It's a huge commitment at the college level, especially at in the higher levels of Division I. It's a huge commitment, and you sacrifice so much to try to play this game. Of course, you want the opportunity to compete, and if it's deemed safe to compete, and there are no restrictions in that state, I don't see why folks can't compete. Now, in our particular situation, let's say in the NEC, the NCAA has issued guidelines that you better follow because if you don't follow them, they're not mandated, but if you don't follow them, something tells me you may be viewed as reckless and you may have a lawsuit coming your way if you have positive COVID test. But anyway, those guidelines state you have to frequently test all athletes during their entire season of competition. You have to test them 72 hours prior to every competition. That would mean that you would have to do that for everyone on the football team, as well as your women's soccer team and your volleyball team, and so on and so forth. And if you have the resources to do that, and you can make an environment where it's the risk of COVID is minimal, and you can make an environment that's safe and everybody agrees and they want to go in there, then you should be able to play. But some of the smaller schools are going to have trouble meeting those testing guidelines for one, and there are other factors as well. The other thing is too, are you going to isolate these students from the rest of the student body? I guess if your college is all virtual learning, that may be a bit easier. But you know, you're talking about student athletes who would be in classes and interacting with a huge campus body, and may be exposed per se. Whereas the NFL, you go to work and then you go home, you go back to work in the morning, and you're not going to be out at bars, or you're not going to be next to people in class who may have been out at bars the night before. So, but the bottom line is, it's a really frustrating time for everyone, and I can definitely understand why the athletes want to compete, because that's what they do, and athletics has such a great benefit in a number of ways for society, but also for personal development and individual development. Athletics are a great thing, and being a member of a team and having that type of family and support, and also learning that type of discipline and having that type of structure, there are really a lot of great things about sports, and it's really crushing me that sports have, at the college level, have kind of been put on hold by COVID, the fears, potential lawsuits, and there's just so many factors that are playing into this situation.
Well, and I think that's where it gets complicated too, is, not only from the conference standpoint, but then you take it to the state by state restrictions and government laws in place. But you hear Ralph say his youth team is practicing in New Jersey. You have high school football being played across the country. And, Craig, we appreciate the time here. I know we're running out of time. And John, you had another question to fire off to Craig.
Yeah, well, just want to let people know, because he's another guest that we have on who is very not self-serving, which is great, especially in this, time frame when we're all dealing with things that are related to football, but not as, clearly way more important. Craig has negotiated for over 200 players in the NFL, over $1 billion worth of business. So if you're a parent, or if you have a kid that's, at Ohio State or any of these schools, the best thing you heard from Craig was the factor that the parents and the kids and the people that are normally wearing, he's normally wearing a different shade of red than Ohio State, but they're all agreeing on the same subject matters being what's most important, for their kids. They're leaving the competition and the, kind of some of the side door activities that go on between universities are kind of staying quiet for the moment, and what's most involved for all of these kids' safety and getting them back on the field is what the parents are paying attention to. And the one last thing that would be a little self-serving is we should also give a couple minutes of time to the factor that JoJo's not the only one playing football right now. There's there's a pretty good quarterback from the Dolman family that's also, playing football. So there's two sons, playing ball, and he's a fairly athletic quarterback that's playing. So, he's, that's a family now that has, two sons that would have been in two different parts of the country, so that's something to think about, when we've talked to all our guests and how, it's a firsthand account of a parent involved in football, obviously has made their living and their life, everything in football, but potentially would have had one son at Nebraska, and another son at Campbell College. I mean, two different parts of the country to be worried about where their kids would be. So, Craig, thank you so much for, sharing your content and what's going on with you and your family.
Appreciate it, guys.
Well, Craig, before we wrap up, final one for you here. Obviously the Big Ten parents staged a march over the weekend with the intent of getting this thing revved up here, ready to go. They said, hey, give us 3 weeks. We can play here in the fall. We can be eligible for those college football playoffs. You being involved with the Nebraska lawsuit, continue to apply the pressure on Big Ten. We all know what the end result that you want is what I just mentioned, but here we are on August 31st. What does Craig Doman realistically feel like can be achieved between now and the next couple weeks?
I think it boils down to more leverage than it does practicality, because the coaches can get the players ready before in the next 3 weeks. The guys are ready. They stay ready. College football players today, it's like the NFL. They don't have to get ready because they're always ready. Okay. And fair, John? I mean, these guys, it's 24/7, 12 months out of the year. So I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue boils down to leverage in the sense that the Big Ten needs to find a way to win. Right now, they're losing. It's almost a lose-lose proposition for them. It's very similar to a negotiation with an NFL team. They've got to give me as an agent an opportunity to win in my client's eyes. I've got to give them an opportunity to win too. And I just don't know how the Big Ten wins. They've got to be honest and look at the COVID numbers have changed. The landscape has changed. The narrative has been we should play ever since they came out and said we shouldn't play. So can they, without eating a piece of humble pie, come out a winner in this? And say, oh, in light of new evidence, we think we can play. And oh, by the way, hey, we can get started on time and everything's back to normal. I think if they could find a win, we can get back on track. If they're going to play stubborn and they're going to go, hey, we're the Big Ten. We think every conference should do what we do. Our evidence is secret. We're not going to share it with you. They wouldn't share it with the Big 12 commissioner, why they did what they did, because Bob Bowlesby at the Big 12 wanted to kind of know, hey, if you guys are doing it, maybe we should cancel too. So give us your information and evidence. They wouldn't do it. So with that being said, I think all it boils down to is, can the Big Ten find a way in the media world to come out the winner? If they can, we're going to have football pretty soon. If they can't, or they won't, we may have it Thanksgiving. We may not have it at all.
Well, certainly a major topic here. We're going to continue to monitor on the state of football. It's been another hour of power. We're out of time. We want to thank Craig Doman from 360 Sports so much for your time. Craig, hopefully when we have some kind of clarity, maybe we can have you hop back on and provide us with an update. Again, our guest, Ralph Ventry from the Northeast Conference Assistant Commissioner. We always appreciate him hopping on board and chopping it up. And for my co-host each and every morning here on the State of Football, John Murphy down in New Orleans, we'll be back at it again tomorrow with another all-star panel. Till the next